Today, we're going to be talking about where we see the future of software engineering and user experience going. And yeah, it should make for a really good conversation. We've got some good topics we're going to dig into. But yeah, Wes, welcome to the show, man.
Building great experiences, revolutionize your business. Building great experiences, innovative strategies. Building great experiences, elevate for your customers. Like, comment, and subscribe.
Hey folks, this is Drew with another episode of the Building Great Experiences podcast. Today I've got someone, a good friend of mine, current teammate, Wes Dews. We are working together at StealthX. We've worked together a couple times before, a company called Red Ventures and a company called Slalom. So this is our third go round, which has been a blast. Anyway, so Wes and I, we jam all the time, daily, on where we think things are going, technology, tools. And recently we were just like, man, we should record this. We should talk about this, and share it with folks. So today we're going to be talking about where we see the future of software engineering and user experience going. And yeah, it should make for a really good conversation. We've got some good topics we're going to dig into. But yeah, Wes, welcome to the show, man.
Hey, thanks for having me. I'm excited for this.
Yeah, for sure. So why don't we kick off? Tell folks a little bit about yourself, your origin story, how you got into this industry, and kind of what makes you who you are.
Yeah. Oh, wow. That's a big question. Well, so I'll keep it just relegated to kind of the software development world. So, in high school, in the kind of late 2008, 2009, in that time period, I had been interested in web development. My father comes from a software engineering background, and so that felt like a low entry threshold way of me getting involved in software development. And it felt like a way for me to make changes quickly and see it coming to life. And also be able to share it with my friends in high school. I thought that was interesting too. And so that's what got me started on web development. Did some vocational classes during high school. In Billings, Montana, of all places, we had something called a career center that you could attend in junior and senior years of high school. And so it just so happened in that relatively small town of Billings, Montana, we had a web development vocational course. And so I took that in my junior and senior years of high school and enjoyed that, and wound up in some ways kind of assistant teaching some of that because I wound up having a leg up beyond some of the other students in that course. So flash forward beyond high school, I was one of those kids that didn't really have a specific major in mind for college. There's a lot of pressure in senior year, especially, to kind of do these assessment tests and figure out what your aptitudes are and stuff like that. And so I felt like I was still unclear enough in what I wanted to do with my life that I didn't really commit to a college major. And I'm glad I didn't, because even though I wound up falling into some random jobs out of high school, I wound up, while I was working as a customer care representative at a cable company, a regional one based out of kind of the Northwest, I had the opportunity to build a tool that helped my fellow customer service representatives on the phone when we were taking customer service notes for our kind of entry system for keeping logs of all of our communications with people. I built a JavaScript-based tool that kind of formatted our notes in the ideal way that our supervisors were asking us to do, And it was cool because it got me back into that love that I had fostered during kind of like my younger years. And so it got me thinking again about web development and how can I take this, what I didn't feel like was the best job, and turn it into a career in technology. So fortuitous night, I popped on Craigslist and found that there was a local print shop. It was actually an Alpha Graphics franchise. It was looking to hire somebody part-time just to help them start building some WordPress websites for their clientele. And so I started doing that alongside my customer care representative job, 2 jobs at once for, I think it was about 4 months. Eventually that turned into a full-time job, and then moved to Charlotte. The rest is history. So that's kind of like my origin story in web development. And it went from simple WordPress development into kind of more intricate, pixel perfect agency style, like really compelling digital experiences. And then in about 2016, that started shifting more and more towards actual, what I would consider true software development in still the web application sphere. So a lot of JavaScript, obviously still HTML and CSS, but a lot more functionality focused and interesting user interactions, solving some compelling problems there beyond just marketing. And carried that on into some different capacities of engineering leadership as well.
Yeah, man. Well, it's awesome. I've heard flavors of that story, but I love the I love the detail. I love the scrappiness. My story is similar. I've had like all kinds of zigs and zags, and like, it's funny. I've shared on the show a couple of times. Like at one point, I had an agency, I had a clothing brand, I started a small record label. We've launched a mobile game, like I've done graphic design, web design, UX, like strategy, all kind of everywhere. And I think, to be honest, I think it makes for a lot more well-rounded people when you have kind of these diverse work experiences that frankly let you solve really interesting problems, because you've got a better picture of kind of how all the stuff fits together.
Mhm.
We've talked about this, like this whole idea of like super generalists, like people who can kind of stretch across a lot of different stuff and figure it out, I think
Yep.
is a really important piece. So, well, cool. So let's talk a little bit about like what we're calling experience engineering, which I think probably people who are listening are like, what is that? What does that mean? What is it? Why do I care? So let's talk about a little bit like, how do you define it? What's the point of it? Who cares?
Yeah, no, that's a good question because it's kind of one of these kind of more abstract titles. What does it actually mean in practice? So when I talk about software engineering, I talk about in my past experience, especially, I've seen a lot of siloing in between software engineering, between design, between product, all these different silos within organizations. What winds up happening is you wind up, let's say you're formulating a new product or maybe changes to an existing product. Throughout that process, you wind up having sort of this waterfall progression of things from the initial inception of the idea into the implementation of it, ultimately through engineering. And those silos they're sometimes necessary, especially depending on organization structure. What winds up happening a lot of times, though, is it breeds this weird throwing over the wall dynamic between each of those groups. And it means then that let's say in this case, I'm a software engineer on this project. Now all of a sudden I have a much greater detachment from the actual thesis of why it is that we're actually doing this work right here, whether it's a small change or an entire product. And so that detachment makes me as a software engineer less effective in my team because I have less influence over, hey, you know what? We had this original idea for this interaction. Now that we're building up some more functionality, it doesn't quite make sense here, or what have you, or it's starting to get out of hand. That dynamic of having software engineers be sort of having a seat at the table with the rest of the crew and being able to have true sway over the direction of where we take things is important. And it can get snuffed out really easily depending on your team and your company culture. And so back to experience engineering, this is sort of a different lens through which we look through software engineering. And this is more of a value-focused software development. So when we're thinking of going through the motions, as it were, for building software, I, as a software engineer, have the distinct advantage of being immersed in this thing from the very beginning, as it's nothing but a single line of code all the way up into a finished product. And that's distinct from product and design, where there's a lot of upfront work and kind of concepting, but it doesn't actually take shape into an interactive thing that the users will eventually get their hands on until the engineers have exposure to it. And that can be hours, that can be days or weeks that they have that kind of increased exposure to the thing. And it's in that moment where you start to build a clearer picture of what does and doesn't make sense. And so this is an example of where experienced engineers are privy to all of the initial thinking, the value behind why it is we're doing this thing. And it's that clear sway and involvement throughout that delivery process to say, this does make sense. Here's maybe a small tweak that we can make throughout delivery that helps it land better.
Yeah, man, very good job. It's funny. We haven't talked through that specific definition before, and I love it. I agree. I think it's like, put simply, especially with AI today, the code is a commodity, and the people who create code are becoming commoditized. And so really what we're talking about is, if you're moving upstream and you're thinking about the value, I love how you framed it, like how what you're building creates value for the business and also for the people who are using whatever the thing is, whether it's a customer, an employee, user, whatever, like that being the guiding light. And I think I've worked with a lot of software engineering people in my career, and the best ones have always been the ones who they don't stay in their lane, right? Like they don't sort of just say, you hand me the requirements and I'm going to go execute it. And if it's wrong, that's your fault. It's not my fault, right? Like I executed the requirements that you gave me.
Yep.
But they're more like actively collaborating on what should this be? Are we building the right thing? Like what is the value that this thing is going to produce? And so you're spending less time on like semantics of code and more time on like what's the point of the code? You know what I mean?
Yep, exactly. Well, to your point about it becoming commoditized in terms of software development, it kind of necessitates this pulling away from the minutia that has historically been kind of the underpinnings of software development and being able to take a more holistic look at the thing that we're building. I know I keep using that term, but I think it's the best general way we can look at this, to look more holistically at the thing that we're building and actually know that it's informed by data, which we're talking about freeing up more time for each of the people involved in creating the thing too. So where we might have neglected things like writing tests or going through and walking through the product as it's taking shape and seeing like, does this actually make sense? Is it put together the right way? Does the user experience lead the user through the necessary actions to complete the task and so on? So we're creating more time to focus on the pruning of making this the ideal experience versus all of the upfront work that's like the bootstrapping the code base and kind of getting it ready with all these necessary like dozens and dozens of steps that are far less prominent now. You can automate a lot of those things away. There's still some of it present, but I think a lot of that's going away much more quickly than we think.
Yeah, love it. So we've already kind of hit on a few of these things, but I want to elaborate a little bit more. Like, where do we see it going, right? Like, where is the future of software engineering, software development, experience engineering, if you will, going from here? What are some of the trend lines that you're seeing?
Yeah. So I think the first thing that's on everybody's minds is this idea that now we can prototype a lot more quickly. And so back to that blurring of the lines between software engineers and their other teammates while creating things. Now we've got an opportunity to kind of start to spell out more adequately in these early stages of product development. What are we actually talking about? And before, it took many stages to get to that point. Lots of fidelity building and interviews and research, even to a point where the software engineers can be involved. And it's not just the software engineers, it's everybody on the team, but getting everybody on the same page. And so now it's as simple as I jump into a tool like Replit, like Bolt, like any of these kind of agent style AI tools, and I can just punch in a small prompt and all of a sudden I have a working, somewhat basic, but still workable prototype that I can start to coalesce around.
Yeah. I think so the prototyping and testing ideas thing is like, that is like upon us. Like it's only going to get easier and easier. I mean, 2 weekends ago, it was my grandmother's like 80 something for 87th birthday. Okay, now I feel bad if someone can't remember.
Wow.
But anyway,
Happy birthday.
Yeah, right. So we were down visiting with her and family and whatever. And anyway, I was playing with Lovable on my phone, and I was kind of showing a few people. And this is kind of funny, but like I was trying to come up with like a quick idea or quick, hey, let me show you like this, how this works. And I was like, give me like something. And my brother was kind of being joke. He was just messing with me. And we were like, we should do like, track your bowel movements and have like a leaderboard. And I was like, boom, done. Like, okay, this is the app that we're building. Yeah. Yeah. So we called it Bowel Buddy was the name of the app. And I went into Lovable and I was like, punched in some stuff. I'm on my phone. I'm at my, my grandmother's assisted living complex or whatever. And within like 30 seconds, I had a functioning app that was actually deployed. And I could like, I copy pasted the link and sent it to my brother. And we're like laughing because it's like, Bowel Buddy with a little poop emoji, and it has a leaderboard, and you can track your I know it sounds like, kind of, maybe not safe for work or whatever, but the point is like in a span of 30 seconds, we had a functioning app that I could literally send to anybody. And, it was deployed. It was like, it was hooked up to, it wasn't Firebase. It was, Lovable has another, databasing tool. I can't remember the name of it. And so it was hooked up to a database. It had like the account. You could create an account, log in, register, all that, like everything worked. I mean, literally, like I could send it to you right now, and you could, if you wanted to, you could be on the leaderboard for Bowel Buddy. But I think it's obviously this is a stupid example, but the point is, you could have ideas. Anyone could have an idea and could quickly and easily concept something, test an idea. Like, for example, in the days when you and I worked 10 years ago at Red Ventures, there would be these moments where, we'd be having lunch, a bunch of us would be having lunch, we were shooting the, breeze over whatever. Someone has an idea for something, and then we go back and like designer and developer would be like sitting in the same pod and like building something together. And like, it would take a couple of hours. Now you could do that and you could literally be like at lunch and just be like, boop, 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 here. And it's like, well, that's a really good idea. Let's actually go test that thing. And it can take seconds versus hours or days or weeks. And I think, we used to pride ourselves before on like the speed to market that we would bring because we had talent that could kind of get stuff done fast and cut through all the noise. But now it's even more easy, or easier to do it, which I think is just pretty cool.
Yeah, no, it's huge. I also like, to that end of being able to just dive in and build something immediately. I think this is also going to mean a big shift for career development in software engineering, meaning where it historically has been the case that if you want to learn a new framework or a new language or whatever, there's a decent threshold that you have to kind of surpass to start making sense of that new technology or tool or whatever. And it's always been that if I have, maybe I'm a mid or junior level engineer and I have maybe a senior or a principal engineer in the cube next to me, I can lean over and start asking questions. Well, you have a good amount of that now to fill that gap in case that isn't the circumstance that you find yourself in as a developer, to just lean on AI for it. So between the ubiquitous number of online training courses for anything you could possibly muster online right now, plus AI, I think a lot of that is going to start to take off really quickly too.
Yeah. I was reading something the other day and it was talking about like knowledge doesn't matter anymore. Doesn't matter what coding languages, doesn't matter like, your expertise in this or that. Like, knowledge isn't the most important thing, which a lot of people, frankly, it's going to be tough for, because it's like they've banked their whole career on what they know.
Yeah.
And it's going to become even more important about how you approach the work, how you think about the work, who you're working with, who like those kind of like softer, squishier things are going to become super, super critical, which I think a lot of folks, I mean, I know you and I both have worked with tons of engineering folks over the years.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of people who are just like, I just want to put my headphones on and I just want to like bang out code. And it's like, that's not going to get you very far anymore,
No. Less and less so. Yeah, exactly. Well, I think because of that, it also winds up ushering in smaller team sizes over the course of time. As AI gets more and more conventionally adopted in some of these corporate environments, I think that you're going to see smaller team sizes, which I do think is good. It winds up being like this typical course that a software development team takes, especially with a product that's lasted a good while, has been kind of adopted and iterated on for a number of years, whatever. So you wind up having these like 13, 20 person teams, and it becomes just that much more difficult to get the work done. So I think that you see those team sizes come down, and that winds up inherently driving better collaboration between those team members because it's smaller. And I think that you get better work product out of that. That's a little hand wavy, but that's just where I see this going.
Yeah. I mean, real world example, right? A couple months ago, you and I and another person on our team built and launched an entire e-commerce experience in like less than 8 weeks. And I remember whenever we were initially talking to the client and other people about that, they were like, no, that's not possible. Like, isn't it months and months to do this? Or like, no, and we, team of, 3 got in there, did it, made it happen. And I think that's going to become much more of the norm. You're going to see time to value shorten. And, the phrase that we kind of say a lot is like, a team of 5 can hit harder than a team of 55. You don't need all of this stuff, all these people and all these things, which, I think there's going to be a lot of people and there are people right now who are afraid. They're like, oh my gosh, what am I going to do? And my sort of challenge to those people is like, move upstream, focus on value, and like reskill like crazy. Like, don't lean on what got you to where you are, because we're going through massive, industrial revolution sized change right now. And the value is the most important thing,
Yeah. Yeah, well, it, I mean, that's one of those things, like I was mentioning earlier, where now we're having more time to focus on those more fundamental problems while we're going through and building software. I think some of those others are, we talked about concepting already. I think, back to being sort of a cross-functional developer versus kind of a specialist, where I might be a front-end developer who focuses on the user interface, or might be a back-end developer more database-oriented, API endpoints, so forth. DevOps, there's like a few different categories that you might find yourself in as a specialist developer. I think it depends a lot on your organization structure again, but the direction is starting to really shift quickly towards full stack kind of generalist type competency in this area. And I think, again, with AI being this like silver bullet to be able to help you fill some of those knowledge gaps while you're leaning more into that generalist direction, has made that a lot easier. But I would say there's a risk here where you delegate too much to AI, especially in these sort of murky, unknown areas that you're starting to lean into as a developer. And I think there are still some basics that we want to be conscious of. Like, I think a lot of developers that may be watching this, for example, would know that if I'm trying to like solve a specific bug in my code base, and I just can't figure it out, I might Google that, find like a Stack Overflow answer on how somebody else might have solved that, might even take that code, copy it, and paste it in my code base. And our guidance historically as software engineering leaders has been, don't do that. You want to understand the code that you're pulling from that online resource first and really make sure it's doing what you know you need it to do. And I think that there's still some like that vetting that has to happen with the output of AI. It's not 100% foolproof what you get out of it. And I think in cases where you're trying to use an agent-like development tool, things like Replit, like vSphere and otherwise, where you're saying, build me a software application, like a to-do app or whatever. It might get 70% of the way, but it's probably going to have a hiccup or two while things are still getting smoothed out, not calling out any one of those specific tools. That's just kind of the state of where these tools are right now. And while those things are getting ironed out, I think it's incumbent on us as developers that might have historically been specialists to start branching out so that we're more effective in those problems that we're inevitably going to be solving over the next year or two.
Yeah. What do you think are some of the biggest considerations? Like, to that point, there's a lot of kind of like known unknowns and unknown unknowns. And with this upheaval because of AI, like, what are the sort of things that are still very critical, tried and true? You got to make sure you're doing these things if you're building something with AI.
Yeah. Well, I think some of the obvious ones that many times get neglected, like testing, like understanding the systems architecture, making sure that that's well understood by each of your team members, because that can often go relegated to a specific team member. So and so does that, so I don't need to know it. I think as we have more time to understand the system more holistically, we start having folks lean in more to that area, myself included. I also think testing, while it does become a lot easier to write tests with AI, there's some cautionary tales there where if I have the system that's suggesting code for me also writing tests, it's a bit like having the fox watch the hen house, so to speak. So maybe that's me outsourcing, writing my tests to a different LLM that I'm using for my software development. Or I think more realistically, you're using these AI tools to kind of write the boilerplate on which you keep building as a developer. And I think it's important. But I think that those are a couple of the things that I see emerging quickly and we need to be mindful of, because I think it could start to head south much more quickly than we realize.
Yeah. I think there's like three things that come to mind for me, which is, you still have to architect the thing. And right now, AI is not capable of kind of like really architecting something that can scale and be sustainable long term. It's like,
it's so close, though.
I know. It's so yeah. And then I think this is something you and I've talked a lot about recently. It's like the cybersecurity part of this. Like, everything is moving so fast, and I think it's going to be really important that people like skill up on just understanding where data is flowing, how it's being stored, making sure that you're not just sort of carte blanche trusting like AI is good and is putting stuff in the right place and putting the right precautions in place. I think we'll probably see a wave over the next 24 months where companies big and small will start getting slapped with lawsuits because there was data breach, the data was leaked, somebody used code that was created by GPT and slapped it in there, and it has a security flaw or whatever. So I think that's probably going to continue to be an important thing for people to think about. Otherwise, you're going to end up in a world of hurt.
Yeah. Well, and it's a hell of a segue for me to bring this up now with your very wise cautions of data usage and compliance. But I think this is also an opportunity for teams to get a lot more savvy about the data for their products to know how they're performing. Because again, now that we have more time by taking care of some of these smaller tasks that are often required to start building a new feature or a new product completely, now we have more time to start assessing what are some of these signals that inform how well my product is actually performing in the market with my users. And so starting to, as a software developer, you're now privy to all these different parts of your application that could or could not inform that performance. And so starting to litter the code base with signals that help to just inform those core functions of the tool, how they're performing with your users, so you can iterate on those too. I think that's one of those things that often gets neglected within the team, and now we have an opportunity to start making that right.
Yeah, for sure. So I want to kind of transition into who's doing this well. Like when you think about companies, brands, teams that are kind of really at the forefront, like who comes to mind to you?
I think specifically Google, they happen to have a title within their ecosystem called UX developer. And I think that risks coming across as if I'm advocating that companies start to carve out a specific role for this UX developer type persona. And that's not really what I'm advocating for. I think really I'm advocating for smaller teams, more value-based thinking amongst those teams. And so I think really to kind of put a pin on that, it's organizations that are operating with smaller teams who have that sort of close collaboration with one another versus these silos that have historically existed where we have specialists throughout.
Yeah, agreed. A couple that come to mind to me are maybe like a little bit less common or typical. I'm going to like highlight a guy named Greg Eisenberg. I've mentioned him on the show before, but it's interesting. He runs he's like kind of one of those like content creator, thought leader guys, but he also runs an agency called Late Checkout. And it was funny. I remember he posted something on LinkedIn the other day, and it was like they were having a product meeting. And during the meeting, they were discussing an idea for like a new startup or a new product. And I guess like one of the engineering guys was kind of like on the side, being quiet. And like at the end of the meeting, he had already sort of built something using, one of the tools, V0, Replit or whatever. And, everybody was like, oh my gosh, this is the future. Right. And so I think there's actually like a lot of smaller companies, smaller agencies, smaller consultancies, product companies. They're really setting the stage, I guess, for this idea of someone who is technical, but also understands the value equation. And they're able to say like, okay, I know how to build this stuff, but I also can like augment myself with these tools and build things faster and vet ideas and show value. So I think like Greg Eisenberg and his crew kind of come to mind. There's a lot of other people like that. They're like these solopreneur type people. Like there's a guy named Levels.io or whatever. It's Levels.io is his site. This guy named Peter, and he's built like, I don't know, 7 or 8 businesses just like by himself. And he's kind of this like, he's an engineering guy, but he understands business, and he's bringing those things together, and he's building and launching products like that are pretty dang good, and he's making money off of it. And I think that like the people who are unencumbered by organizational bullshit are the ones that are doing this really well right now. The organizations that are slowed by, they have a CISO, Chief Information Security Officer. They've got cybersecurity stuff. They've got the regulated industries. They're so shackled to like the way things have been that they can't move fast enough to play with this stuff. And so I think it's going to be a lot of these smaller, even like one person shops are going to be like light years ahead of everybody else because they're not slowed down by bureaucracy,
Exactly. There's a massive shift that's going to need to happen in a lot of these bigger enterprises, like you're saying, to be able to allow for even the flexibility to start playing with these tools and starting to even integrate them into their processes. You're exactly right. Because right now, it suffice it to say, a lot of those barriers are up out of necessity to make sure that we're not leaking, proprietary company data or PHI or what have you. But things are going to need to change. I think that they're going to be reactionary at first because a lot of these companies are going to inherently have people that are just trying to experiment and keep up with where things are going.
Yeah. Let's change gears into like practical ways that people can kind of move forward, right? We've covered a lot of ground. We've talked about experience engineering. We've talked about moving up into the value conversation. What are some practical things people can do coming out of this episode, whether it's in their team, whether it's personally, professionally, whatever? What do you think?
I think the first one would be just like we were just talking about. Start to get your hands on some tools, especially because a lot of these are free or damn near free to use right now. And so if there's something that's been on your list, you've heard a lot about this in your workplace, or it's a tool that specifically focuses on a part of your workflow that takes a ton of your time, pay the monthly fee, give it a shot, see how it works for you. And if it works out really well and you think that it could be an asset to you, start using it in your everyday workflow. And I think that that'll be a huge boost to the individual. I think to the organization, considering how we take some of our more siloed team members and start pull them into the decision-making process, make sure everybody understands the why of what we're building, what it means to have this deployed and what it means for the business and so on. And I think, another one for the developers that haven't been watching this one is all of those tedious tasks that are involved with starting a new feature, a new product, whatever, just kind of bootstrapping that project. Start to incorporate development tools that help you erase a lot of that wasted time now, because we can delegate a lot of that reasonably so to AI, especially with that boilerplate level. I think the last thing that I'd say is be conscious to those things that we were talking about before, those risks of security, of data, of all these different exposure points where we could be turning a blind eye because now we have AI integrated in our process. We can start to kind of shut off some of those parts of our brains that we were using before, just being careful about that.
Yeah. That's good. A couple that come to mind for me are things that like we do at StealthX. So like we just had this morning a team, we call it like our innovation session. Every week we get together, we kind of share, what are tools that we're working on, what are ideas we have for products, what are, trends that we're seeing. And I think leaders, if you're regardless of your product, marketing, engineering, business, whatever universe you come from, I would start to make it a priority to have your teams share what they're finding, what they're reading, what they're seeing, and then like experiment with it. And like one of the things that we're doing, Wes has built us is kind of like, we use Notion at StealthX. So we have like this thing called Radar. And essentially it's like, here's all the tools that we're kind of seeing out in the ecosystem. We're prioritizing them. We're, put somebody accountable for trying it out. They're going in, they're signing up for a month or whatever, playing with it, and then as quick as possible moving to like, is it good or bad, right? Like thumbs up, thumbs down. Is it worth paying for? Is it worth using? Is it worth experimenting with? And so I think that's something leaders could do, like encourage the experimentation, encourage and create a space where people can play around, right? Because I think that's the best way to learn. Another one that I would suggest, this is like super low hanging fruit. We use Otter. There's also Fathom. There's all these like note taker apps or whatever. It is baffling to me how many people still don't use these things. Like they're very cheap, like $20 a month or whatever. It joins your meeting, it records what you're saying, and then it spits out meeting notes, action items, insights, takeaways, whatever. And then if you want to get really crazy, you can export that transcript and you can feed it into a GPT or a Claude, and you can basically pull it into a whole nother level of thinking. You can create roadmaps from it. I mean, there's a lot you can do. And I think a lot of people like, they get kind of stuck in the way that they've been doing it. Like, this is how note taking should be. And this is like how in the product world, it's like we need to make a product requirements document, and the product manager or the product owner needs to write that, and they need to detail out the requirements, and then we need to put it in Jira, and then we need to. It's like there's this process for process sake, and like blow all of that up. Like, don't be afraid to blow up your process, because if you don't, someone else will. You know what I mean? Like the competitors are going to blow that up for you. Like, I think, a bit of a controversial statement, I think Agile is dead. I think that
Yeah.
the Agile way of building software is like, basically, it's like if you were the person pushing the plow in the field, right? And then like suddenly electricity exists, and you can like have these automated systems, and like the person who's still like pushing the plow in the field, like, why are you doing that? Go use like gas engines or electricity. Like that's kind of what it feels like. So anyway, I think I would challenge people to think about like, what are the things that you're doing every day, like taking notes or logging stuff manually in Jira, or the cadences and rituals that you've been doing for years because of just like, this is the Agile way. Question, why am I doing this? Is it important? Is it adding value? What's really the point of this?
I think it's a really good point. I think it's in the spirit of questioning assumptions. I'll make an admission now and say that as AI started to get to a point where you could plug into GPT and get some pretty robust code snippets out that you could use in the real world, I, as like a career software developer, started to feel kind of as if I were to incorporate AI into my workflow, it's almost like I am the person who is shaping and setting up the plank that will be mounted onto the ship for me to walk off of at some point, sort of like that. And I'm working on that analogy, by the way, but something along those lines, to where I had to kind of overcome this fear of using AI in a world where it might replace me soon thereafter. And what I will say is, ever since I've gotten over that and have actually integrated it, it's been nothing but a jetpack. And there are some things to look out for, some of the things that we've talked about on this call. But I think by and large, it's a tool that we need to start figuring out how quickly can we integrate it.
Yeah, agreed. And I think that this is kind of like super meta, but if you are struggling, for those who are struggling with the like internalizing this, or to your point, like there's almost like a pride of ownership, or like, well, I have to write the code, or I have to write the thing, or I have to do the thing for it to be real. Kind of in a funny way, like I would actually talk to AI and like have like give it some of these like prompts that help kind of explain how to do things differently, how to do things in a way that maybe are ethical, that are, not, you're not ripping somebody else off, you're not just like carte blanche taking AI. Like, it's kind of a funny thing to say, but like you can use AI as a sounding board for why you should use AI.
That's true. Yeah. No, that's a good point.
Yeah. Well, cool, man. Great conversation as always. Any final parting thoughts before we wrap up?
No, I appreciate the chance to jump on. I know you and I have been talking about this for a while. And I think this is one of those topics that's changing so rapidly that we're going to wind up being on another one of these episodes here in the next several months, talking about some other massive development in the industry that has shaken everybody to their core, sort of like DeepSeek. I think that we're going to start to see a lot more of those popping off every month or so.
Yeah, for sure. Agreed. Cool. Where can folks find you online?
They can find me on LinkedIn. That is the single most place where I am updating and kind of connecting with people. So if you're interested in talking more about software development, AI, experience engineering, give me a shout.
Cool. And folks, you can find me online, Drew H. Burdick, on all kind of major social platforms. Also drewburdick.com. And then, obviously, because Wes and I both are StealthXers, feel free to look us up, StealthX.co. We're doing a lot of really cool stuff right now. We're actually, in a couple of weeks, which this will probably be after this airs, we are hosting an event called Product Jam in Charlotte, which is where we're working with 5 early stage startups and helping them, frankly, do a lot of what we just talked about, helping them leverage tools and technology to move faster, helping them figure out, where should they play in their market and how can they win, right? And it's really this focusing on the value, not just focusing on features and functionality. So be sure to check it out, productjamclt.com. And one other quick plug, if you haven't seen it, myself and one of our buddies, Andrew Duncan, wrote a AI North Star playbook. So you can check that out. Link is in the description. Super helpful tool for just like understanding how to apply AI and use it to solve the right problem, not just solve any problem. So with that, Wes, man, thanks for being on the show. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, man. I'll see you soon.